Welcome to how to rig a character. You'll see right here we've got Simon set up and all of his joints are inside of him. In order to see the joints a little easier, I'm going to go to the shading submenu and go to the X-ray joints, and you'll see inside of here there's X-ray joints. When we click on these joints, before we go through the binding and the rigging process, we want to make sure that all of the joints are reorientated in the correct direction. So I'm going to select on the root joints down here and click on the F or select the F8 or component mode for our joints. And at the top up here in your icons, I'm going to click on the question mark. And the question mark will basically detail out which orientation the joints are pointing to. You'll notice that all of my arms are pointing in the same direction. Likewise for the legs, they're all pointing in the same direction. And the idea behind having them oriented in the proper direction is so that when we go to rotate and select an object or pick it up, both the arms will move in the same positive Y direction, the same knees will bend in the same direction, etc. It's not like one side of his body will be a positive and the other side will be a negative. To get out of this component mode, we're going to go back into object mode. The easiest way to do this is to press the F8 key. And you'll notice with these joints that I have right here, they're not bound to the skin yet. So when I do a slight little rotation on them, you'll see that the skin is not moving with them. Okay, so I'm going to undo my position there. So the idea behind this is that we want to select all of these joints and assign the skin to the joints themselves. So the easiest way to do this is to do what's called a smooth bind. So again, I'm going to select my root or my parent joints down here and then shift select on the skin. The skin is always the last thing you're going to select when you go through the binding process. We're going to go up to the top and click on Skin, Bind Skin, and click on the Options box next to Smooth Bind. In this menu here, you'll see that the Bind To choices are listed, and because I've only selected one joint, and that was the root joint down by the pelvis, I want to make sure that my Bind To is set to Joint Hierarchy. If I were only doing certain joints, I would do Selected Joints, but in our case, we are doing the joint hierarchy. By default, Maya chooses the max influences to 5 and the drop-off rate to 4. I'm going to decrease the max influences down to 3 and the drop-off rate to 2. The idea behind this is that every single vertice that's on our character needs to be assigned to a particular joint. And so if we were to leave the max influences set to 5, that means this particular vertex that I happen to be pointing to could be affected by up to 5 different joints. Well, in theory, that sounds like a good idea. However, when I were to bend my elbow, you're going to start seeing part of your armpit bending, and that doesn't make sense. So we want to limit the number of influences. Then some might ask, well, why not set it to 1 and 1? Well, in that case, if you think about it, when you bend or twist your wrist, part of your skin in the forearm area also gets slightly moved as well. So we don't want there to be a hard, fast line between what will move and what won't move. We would like it so that way part of the skin slowly tapers off in the amount in which it will move. And that is what the drop-off rate is alluding to. The last thing you'll see there is a colorized skeleton. And when this is checked, and we press the bind skin, when we're all done here, we're going to click off and look at the colorized skeleton. And that's what that means. It colorizes, that way you can see that it actually is bound to the skin. So now we have to go through and test to make sure that the binding process was successful. The first thing we're going to do before we do any kind of movements is I'm going to select the roots joint, right click and hold, and choose Set Preferred Angle. The idea behind the Set Preferred Angle allows us to make adjustments to see how the skin is moving or to see how the joints are moving, and when I click off, I want to be able to assume the preferred angle. Okay, so once again, once you're done making slight adjustments, we can go back to the root area and choose a certain preferred angle, and his body will snap back. So the idea here is that we're going to test out to see what parts of the skin need to be adjusted so that way they actually bend more fluently. So I'm going to zoom into the arm, to the shoulder area right here, and you'll see when I go to bend the shoulder, that part of his ear is also going to move as well. And once again, you never want to move your joints, you only want to rotate them. So I'm going to select his shoulder joint and wiggle his arm, and you can see that there's a slight movement there on his ear. So the way to fix this I'm going to undo my movement, is to adjust the paint weights for the skin. So to do so, we want to select the skin in object mode, go up to the skin menu, go to Edit Smooth Skin, and click on the Options box next to the Paint Skin Weights tool. Okay, when we do so, your character will turn black and a subtle area of it will be white. So the reason why that area is white is that happens to be the joint that is selected over here on the left hand side of the screen. So what we want to fix though is actually this ear. And so though the shoulder is the problem in the way it moves, it's grabbing onto the ear, the solution is to reassign the vertices of the ear to the nearby joint. Okay? So just as a backtrack, you might see some interesting joints up here in this character. And the reason why we've got these additional joints in here is because every single vertice on the character must be attached to a joint. So if I only put one joint here in the middle of the character's head, basically if I want to do any kind of ear wiggling or movement, all of these vertices right here are going to have an issue when I move my shoulder because of that max influences that was set when we first bound the skin. So by adding a few extra joints inside this area, it takes care of those max influences. Knowing full well that I will likely never rotate this joint, it basically assigns these vertices throughout this portion of the head to these three joints going through here. Oops, let me undo that. So therefore, those portions of his face won't move because he bent his neck or because he moved his shoulder. So essentially, they're basically bogus joints that are there to attach those vertices. So like I said, I'm going to scroll down here on the left-hand side and find the joint in which I want the ear to be selected or assigned to. Now, because I threw those joints in last minute, I didn't rename them appropriately. However, I do know it's joint number 1. So when you click on joint number 1, you can see this is highlighted right here. So again, the solution is to reassign or to assign these vertices to the appropriate joints. At no point should you ever feel an obligation to go through all of these different joints and repaint them. Maya does a really great job. But on a few of them, because the ear dangles a little lower, it gets confused and wants to move with the shoulder. So over here on the left-hand side, under the Paint Skin Weights tool, we want to make sure that our mode is set to paint. We're also going to set our operation to replace. Never do add, do replace. And down here where it says value, we're going to leave this assigned to 1 for the time being. I'm going to hold down the B key and scrub to make my brush a little smaller. I don't want to accidentally paint part of other areas of his body to be assigned to joint 1. So I'm going to be very particular about it. So the last step is it doesn't do you any good to scrub in the middle of his ear. This is essentially the face of the character's face, and what we're assigning are the actual vertices. So the vertices are where the edges come together. So I'm going to do a quick little scrub over here, and you'll see as I scrub, this area will turn very white, okay? And that's fine for this area. Again, we don't want to do it on the whole body, but we are certain that at no point in time should this ear be affected by the shoulder, okay? So you might need to scrub around and get inside of there just to make sure it worked, but that should take care of it. Let me get inside one more over here. Make sure this area turns nice and bright white, okay? So let's test it out. I'm going to go back to my selection arrow, the Q key, select my shoulder joints, give it a quick rotation, and as I move my arm now, my ear is no longer affected. Okay? Alright, so the next step, this shoulder area right here. This is a little bit more challenging in that we need the skin underneath his armpit to move, but not so drastically where it looks like it's cracking. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my arm in this bent position so that way I can see the skin moving when I go to fix it. Okay? And you can see the two vertices that I want to fix are these right here. So again, I've selected the character's skin. It's in object mode. My last used tool is the Paint Skin Weights tool, so I'm going to double click on that. And I'm going to go to the joint in which I want these vertices to be reassigned to. So I know they're called spine, so I'm going to scroll down here to where I have my spines. Let's see. Oops. Shoulders, elbows. There we go. There's our spine. So So spine 4 is too high, spine 3. Okay, so before I start painting away, I want to point out that this skin does need to have a little bit of movement. It happens when you move your shoulder, part of your rib cage area does move. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify the value. Instead of 100% of this vertice being affected by only this joint, what I want to do is say, let's say like 0.6, so 60% of this vertice should be assigned to this joint, thereby leaving 40% of this vertice to be affected by excuse me, this joint down here, as well as some nearby joints through here. So it still will move when I move the shoulder, just not as drastically. So I'm going to click on these vertices, excuse me. Just one little click, and again, I'm only clicking on where the vertex is at. There's no need to paint this whole face area. It won't do you any good. If anything, it will accidentally paint vertices you hadn't intended on painting. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the way the skin popped back out, and the reason why the skin popped back out is because I took off some of the influences from the shoulder joint and I reassigned them to this particular joint right there. I'm going to test it back out. I went back to my selection arrow. I used my shoulder, and again, if I use my my rotate tool, you'll see the skin does move, but it's not as cracky as it was before. To go back to your default position, you can always go back to your root area and choose Assume Preferred Angle. Alright, the last step is that we're going to go down to the leg area. You'll see when I pick up on this character's kneecap and bend it backwards, part of his toe on the other foot moves as well. So again, I'm going to leave his body in this bent mode, so that way part of his, you can see the skin itself is already shifting on the other foot, and so I want to see that. Okay, and so what we're going to do to fix this one is I'm going to get nice and close, select the skin, and while I've moved the character's left foot, I want to get to the joints on his right foot. So again, I'm going to go back into my Edit Paint Skin Weights tool. I'm going to find his right foot. Here's his right, let's see, left. His right foot is right there. So actually I'm going to do the toe on the right. The toe on the right is specific to what I would consider the ball area of his foot. Make it tumble in there, and if you recall, we modified the value with the last one, and this time I'm going to set it back to 1. Press your Enter key to commit the change. And again, if you need to change your brush size, by all means do so. But as I scrubbed over these vertices, they snapped back, so that way they were no longer being affected by the left foot. It only is going to take on effect from the right foot. Okay? And lastly, I'll select on the toe right end, because there's one more vertex that's sticking out there, and so we will reassign it to this toe end. Done. Now as I go back and I shift my foot, a few more movements in there. Alright. As I go back and adjust my leg, the left knee, and I move it back and forth, you can see his right foot is no longer moving. So I would continue this process throughout the rest of his body. As I said before, at no point should you feel an obligation or a need to come through your character and do something like this. There's no need for you to go through and paint the pelvis and paint the hip, okay? I'm going to undo those changes. We do not want to do anything of that nature. We want to go back to just letting Maya assign most of the influences, and then we have to go through and modify subtle areas where adjustments need to be made. And that's it. That's how the Paint Skin Weights tool works. Have a good day.